Right, we shall start. Welcome everyone to the Cultural Heritage Society and Ethics Call kickoff meeting. We're very pleased to have you all today with us. So around the table here are colleagues from ANR, the French National Research Agency, and the JPI Cultural Heritage Secretariat. So my name is Benjamin Connert. I work at the French National Research Agency, and I think many of you would have interacted with me over the span of this call. And today the purpose is to present you the projects that were selected for funding. Before I turn to Pascal Liévaux, the chair of the JPI Cultural Heritage, I'd like to introduce our agenda for today, and also to present a few housekeeping rules. So the agenda for today is quite dense, as you can see. We'll have a welcome address first by Pascal. Then I'll tell you a little bit about the CHAC call results and how the projects were selected, kind of the procedural aspects of today's meeting. Then we'll hear from the project leaders themselves, and we'll have thematic roundtable discussions chaired by two members of the JPI CH Advisory and Scientific Board, Scientific Group, actually. And then actually the second part of the meeting, so starting from 11:50, will be focused on the monitoring of the project and really the life of the project after today, if you like. So perhaps that might be less interesting for those of you who join us from the Advisory and Scientific Board of the JPI CH or from the panel who was involved in selecting the projects, but you're of course very welcome to stay on. And at around 12:20, we should have closing remarks from Charles-Géry Deloison, who is with us as well in the room. And as I mentioned to some of you, those who receive funding from ANR and NWO will have short breakout room discussions where we'll introduce the funding rules and regulations for these agencies specifically. And finally, two housekeeping rules. So first of all, just to say the presentations are recorded, but so only the presentations of the projects, not the discussion. So feel free to interact as you wish. We thought we would not record the discussion, so we can have a free conversation if you like. And also there will be the opportunity to ask questions after each of these presentations insofar as possible, because perhaps if we're a bit late, we might skip the question at some point, but you will have the opportunity to ask those either at the end of the meeting or by email. And if you want to ask questions, you can use the chat function or the raise hand function, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So without further ado, I turn to Pascal for his introductory remarks.
Thank you, Benjamin, and good morning, everybody, dear colleagues and partners. To open this meeting, I would like to say some words about the JPI Cultural Heritage and about this call. Because when the JPI partners and scientific group members gathered on the 28th of January 2020 in London to put together the challenges and research priorities that would form the future priorities of the JPI Cultural Heritage Strategic Research Agenda, published in the second half of the same year, they were far from imagining the outstanding echo that these challenges and priorities would find in the events to follow on a global perspective. Because 3 days later, the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union was effective. The first sovereign country to leave the EU, it had been a member state since 1973. Almost 1 month later, on the 24th of February, the first lockdown measures were decreed in Italy to counter the effects of the rising COVID-19 pandemic. And 2 years later, the forces of the Russian Federation penetrated the Ukrainian territory, provoking a significant escalation of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, resulting in hundreds of thousands of victims on both sides, and instigating Europe's largest refugee crisis since World War II. All these events have profoundly modified our environment and made the themes and challenges addressed by the Cultural Heritage Society and Ethics joint call all the more relevant, as it is addressing the four major challenges identified by JPI Cultural Heritage partners in the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. The first one, a reflective heritage for a resilient society, aims to approach cultural heritage as a dynamic and responsive phenomenon in a changing world, society, and environment, and to demonstrate through research how extensive and profound public care towards cultural heritage is the basis of a sound and reflective society that may serve as a deterrent against abuse of power, politicization, and economic speculation. The second one, sustainable management of cultural heritage, aims to explore unprecedented opportunities and challenges provided by digital technology and artificial intelligence for cultural heritage, as well as alternative business models for heritage, while trying to convince decision makers in the political and private sectors of the added value of cultural heritage. The third priority, cultural heritage in a changing context, directly addresses the implication of increasing threats such as conflicts or pandemics on cultural heritage management strategies, but also demographic changes and tourism. And last but not least, priority is dedicated to cultural heritage facing climate and environment change. So it is thus with great pleasure that I would like to welcome the 6 new projects selected and funded among the more than 70 proposals submitted for this 7th joint call for proposals launched by 8 of the JPI Cultural Heritage funding partners, Belgium, Czech Republic, France, Lithuania, Norway, the Netherlands, Spain, and the UK. I want to congratulate you on passing the selection process, and we all now have great expectations regarding the results of your research activities that will bring to the cultural heritage community. Your projects will explore the way cultural heritage contributes to the great contemporary challenges with multi- and transdisciplinary methodologies and approaches at a time when we are all witnessing a paradigm shift in the way to approach and study cultural heritage. Cultural heritage no longer playing a passive role by facing the consequences of these challenges, but an active role by demonstrating that it can be a resource and part of the solution to them. The JPI Cultural Heritage projects founded should create conditions for new ways of engagement and dialogue between disciplines and stakeholders, and revisit the perception and environmental, social, cultural, and economic valuation of cultural heritage by better including multivocality and ethical considerations. For this, they will address 2 complementary themes. The first one explores the tensions between how cultural heritage can contribute to the development of sustainable economies without being put at risk, and concurrently, how the non-utilitarian value of cultural heritage can be promoted in the context of its growing commercialization. The second explores the relationship between cultural heritage, democratic values, and politics from a historical perspective to contribute to sustainable and ethical behaviors and policies. As I said earlier, the recent global events have strongly exposed our experience-based economies, such as tourism and cultural events, and demonstrated the central place cultural heritage occupies in our societies, calling for a better understanding of the processes and mechanisms at stake behind cultural heritage. By exploring topics as diverse as Arctic heritage, cultural heritage in the metropolitan peripheries, or in depopulated areas, the relation between museums and industry, the archives of Europe's queers, or investigating how care is mobilized for cultural heritage during armed conflict, the 6 projects funded by this joint call will contribute to enhance social cohesion, counter-based and unfounded narratives for dis or misinformation purposes, and challenge unsustainable and unethical behaviors. I wish you all a good meeting and best wishes for your research in the next 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal, for these introductory words. And we'll move on straight into the, sorry, just sharing my screen, straight into the feedback from the call, and just to expand a little bit on what Pascal explained with regards to this call. So as you might know, it was the 7th research call that the JPI Cultural Heritage launched since its pilot call in 2013. It had 8 countries, as was mentioned just now. We had almost 5 million of funding available, and the call was in 2 steps. So first of all, applicants were asked to submit pre-proposals and then full proposals on the 5th of September. So the call was developed by an expert writing group composed of members of the advisory and scientific board of the JPI Cultural Heritage and of the scientific group. And the purpose really was to stimulate trans and interdisciplinary research involving what is often seen as quite a challenging, and is indeed a very challenging criteria, involving at least 3 principal investigators from 3 different countries and seeking funding from 3 different funding organizations, and at least 1 associate partner who essentially, whose role is to strengthen the impact, the societal impact of the research. The project must last between 24 and 36 months in duration. Just to expand a little bit and to give you a little bit more details on how many proposals we receive, and that will help you appreciate the success that your presence here today really represents. So we had 73 pre-proposals at the first stage. So spread out across the different countries participating in the call. 10 of them were unfortunately deemed ineligible because 1 or several of the project partners did not meet the national eligibility criteria. So we always insist on the importance of checking the national eligibility criteria, because if 1 partner is not eligible, then often that means the consortium as a whole falls, because it no longer meets the requirement of involving 3 principal investigators from 3 countries. So unfortunately, that was the case here for 9 applications. And also 1 applicant did not provide the required documentation on time. There were also 4 incomplete proposals, so that meant we could invite 59 pre-proposals to stage 2, which was really when most of the work would then happen, because that was a much longer, obviously, document we were asking for, much more detailed information we were asking for, and 53 full proposals were then submitted. Again, unfortunately, some applications were deemed ineligible for formal requirements not being respected, unfortunately. So sometimes the word counts was not respected for some of the mandatory sections, and we must really ensure that all applications are on an equal footing. So we could not let these applications go in. Also there was 1 for some applications, 4 of them, 1 or several of the PI did not comply with the financial regulations, so the budgetary regulations that we had set, and so these could not progress to the evaluation. So in total, 41 eligible full proposals were evaluated, and they were evaluated by an international assessment panel chaired by Professor Eva Svensson, who is a member of the scientific group of the JPI CH, and who is from Sweden, so a country that did not participate in the call. We also always do that for JPI CH call. We ensure that the chair comes from a country that does not participate to avoid as much as possible any conflict of interest. And there were 19 panel members from 12 different countries in total. So not only countries participating, of course, but also countries outside. So we're very pleased to have had a very diverse panel there, both in terms of expertise, but also in terms of nationality. The proposals were assessed against 3 assessment criteria, which you can see here and which you're probably very familiar with, but research excellence, impact, and the management of the project, the management plan for the project. And we asked 3 panel members to evaluate each of the proposals. So this form of triangulation allowed to have a diverse and quite a comprehensive view on each of the proposals. And the final scores for each of the projects were agreed upon by consensus among the panel members at the IAP meeting, bearing in mind actually that there were scores that were given ahead of the meeting that were of course taken into account, but then it was a consensus view that made the final decision of the panel. And I should mention also that we had put in place a quality threshold in that only proposals passing the threshold of 3 out of 5 on average for each of the evaluation criteria and scoring of minimum of 12 out of 15 on average were eligible for funding. So although that sounds quite technical, it's actually quite an important requirement for us. That meant that actually only a good third of the proposals that were evaluated met that the quality threshold and were therefore ranked by the IAP. And the ranking here is really what constitutes the output of the panel meeting, which will then be taken to the funding organization. So that's really quite an important step there. And so what we did as funding organizations is that we used the ranking that was produced by the IAP, and according to the funding availabilities, we were able to identify the 6 projects that were selected for funding, and these are the projects that you're involved in and that you are discovering here for others who are not part of the call management. So as an initiative, we were quite pleased with this call because actually 76% of the available funding was used as part and dispersed as part of this call, which is quite successful. And we're very pleased that the research community benefits from this funding and as much as possible. Here, perhaps just a quick overview of where projects, what the project status is now. You can see the start date, duration, and also the funding awarded by the call and the total cost. So the difference here comes from the fact that some projects receive funding from other sources, including associate partners who sometimes bring in financial resources. Or their own institutions also sometimes offer funding. So that's it for the feedback on this call. If you have any questions on these results, feel free to contact us at the email addresses there. We would be very happy to provide further details. And for any project-specific queries, but you'll hear more about that in a few moments, you can contact the dedicated JPI CH project observers, which Marika will tell you about, or you can contact Marika at this email address. I'm checking the time. Yeah, it's just 10:20, so I think we will move on to the next presentation and actually to the roundtable discussions immediately, and not take any questions now in order to avoid delaying the agenda. I hope that's okay. If you have any questions, just drop them in the chat and we'll make sure to address them either at the end of the meeting or by email later. So as mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we have two roundtable discussions with our 6 projects. The projects were grouped according to their themes. Of course, they are very various themes, but we thought it would be interesting still to make them discuss their projects together and to find common perhaps synergies or differences which could be of interest for us all. And so we've asked Professor Inger Liemans and Professor Erkan Glorstad to chair this roundtable discussion. They are both members of the scientific group of the JPI Cultural Heritage. And so I will leave you in their hands in a minute. Just to introduce briefly the speakers on roundtable 1. So we have the project leader of DECOPE, so Josephine Rasmussen at the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research. We'll have then for the project MalLHoC, Scott Anthony, a deputy head of research and public history at the Science Museum in London. For PERCOL, we'll have Professor Glyn Davis, Professor of Film Studies. And then roundtable 2 for ArcHeritage, we have Professor Richard Fraser at the Arctic University of Norway. Then CUMET, we have Professor Maria Gravari-Barbas at the Sorbonne University in Paris. And finally, HerlnDep, Ivan Marin, Associate Professor at Charles University of Prague. So with that, I give the floor to Inger to perhaps just present yourself, and then we'll ask each of the project leaders to present their projects consecutively. I have the presentations on my slides there, so I can share them and you just tell me when you want me to move on to the next slide.
Yeah, thank you so much. Welcome everyone. And first of all, congratulations on the awarding of your project. When we were drafting the agenda for this call, we of course did not know what would come in. So for us, it's a really celebrative moment to see all these fantastic projects that are about to unfold. I myself am working on the Horizon 2020 project on olfactory heritage, so the heritage of smell. So I will be the chair of this first roundtable, and I'm basically here to give you the floor and listen to your projects and to see how we in the discussions can learn from each other. So that being said, I think it would be good to start with DECOPE. My suggestion would be that we have 7-minute presentations for each project, that we take a couple of minutes after the presentation for specific questions to the project, and then we have a quite extensive space for more general discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Inger. And Josephine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'm the leader of the DECOPE project, and we consist of research teams in Norway, Scotland, and Spain, and in partnership with 2 state heritage bodies and 2 Ukrainian NGOs. And if you use the camera on your phone to open the link in the QR code on this slide, you can find our project webpage with more information. So please feel free to look us up. Our project broadly concerns how care for cultural heritage is mobilized in armed conflict, and to investigate the effects of various initiatives to mitigate threats. Our case and context for the project is Russia's war and aggression towards Ukraine, which locates major challenges relating to heritage and armed conflict in Europe. And the project members have backgrounds in studies of the role of cultural heritage and cultural workers in times of conflict, of destruction, targeting, and appropriation of cultural property, and cultural property as a tool and asset in hybrid warfare, as well as studies in the illicit antiquities trade and archaeology and nationalism. Some of us have studied these phenomena in the context of other conflicts, so Iraq, Syria, Cyprus, and the Levant, while others have their background mainly in the specific context of Ukraine. And we're very grateful to have the cooperation of our Ukrainian partners, the Center for Urban History of East Central Europe and the Museum Crisis Center, also known as the New Museum NGO. And furthermore, we're very grateful to have the national heritage bodies of the participating countries who are also represented in the project as APs. And this has been crucial in grounding the impact and relevance of the project for stakeholders and policymakers and the project participants. There is already a lot of research and documentation on the contentious role of cultural heritage in other conflicts and contexts. And our project is aimed at investigating how this plays out currently and in Ukraine and in Europe. We're specifically looking at what can be learned from the practices of care and experience on the ground and neighboring European countries in order to create more effective support for the work of professionals and communities during and in the wake of armed conflict. Can we move to the objectives of the project, please? The next slide. Yeah. So this is how the project objectives were set out in our proposals: to advance knowledge on how care for cultural heritage is being mobilized, to identify factors that facilitate or constrain delivery, and importantly, who sets the agenda for care? Is it the sender or is it the receiver? But we are working alongside the real-time unfolding of the conflict and the responses that we're studying. So we expect some adjustment to the objectives of the project. And furthermore, a key factor for us is the participation of heritage practitioners in the research and knowledge production that we're undertaking. So this is what objectives 4 to 6 are then all about. And next slide, please. The DECOPE is an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary project. We come from anthropology, archaeology, art history, heritage studies, trafficking and conflict studies, as well as criminology. And our project is underpinned by theories of care and political economy, hopefully enabling an analysis of the geopolitical nexus of local, national, as well as international networks of care. And more specifically, this approach allows us to examine how particular ideas, particular institutions and actors and various interests inform the distribution of aid and resources that are associated with the problem of how to rescue cultural heritage in peril, and also how threats are being perceived and presented. So through online and face-to-face fieldwork, we work with Ukrainian professionals to understand how they mitigate damage to both the heritage that they manage and also to their professional lives. Through cooperation with antiquities market actors and public administrators, we also seek to identify barriers and constraints to caring for cultural heritage across borders. And the applied methods and the DECOPE project include the ones that you see on the slide. And through all our interlinked work packages, we work systematically with risk assessment and with ethical concerns. So moving to the expected impacts, I just want to add a note here. A lot of international money is currently being funneled into support for Ukraine, and this will also be the case in the coming years. A lot is a bit abstract, so I'm going to use the example of my own country, Norway. The Norwegian Parliament has allocated 6.3 billion euro to Ukraine over the next 5 years. And although most of this is military support, significant amounts are funds to support humanitarian and civilian aid. And my point is that while peace is not in sight, there is little doubt that Ukraine will be the biggest European reconstruction site since perhaps World War II. And heritage maintenance will be part of this. We therefore hope to contribute to, and here I'm reading from the impact aims, to provide better understanding of the challenges relating to the division of labor, resource distribution and priority setting, and overall communication for those working in rescue projects. Increased observation of due diligence by art market stakeholders, increased capacity of regulators to prove criminal intent, equitable cooperation between local and non-local heritage actors, and also improve the preparedness of peaceful neighbors to understanding and regulating their roles and responsibilities as rescuers versus appropriators of cultural goods. So we hope for more effective support for heritage in Ukraine, as well as the communities involved in the work. And this is a selection of the impacts that we are envisioning. Our broad approach to research impact draws on Reid and Fassy's discussion of impact cultures that some of you are, I'm sure, familiar with. They argue that effective impact is underpinned by shared, rigorous, and ethical research, and argue for the importance of co-productivity and participatory impact cultures based on long-term relationships and strategies, regular communication and reciprocity, and an active investment in time and resources. So our research design embeds key stakeholders and the research process, and members of our research team have strong and pre-existing relationships based on previous collaboration with our partner representatives and their organizations. Final evaluation meetings co-organized by APs and PIs at the end of the project and with stakeholders in the various partner countries, and including Ukraine, online if need be, will also, we hope, facilitate knowledge exchange and dissemination of impact, as well as we're hoping that also the project reference group that we are in the process of forming will contribute to the same. So in this way, we hope to impact on multiple communities of researchers and stakeholders, and that we can produce the significant societal value by translating this local knowledge and impact into the globalized thinking and really care practices. Thank you for your support.
Go to the second presentation by Scott Anthony about MalLHoC, but I'm not quite sure whether I pronounce it right. But Scott, please feel free to correct me here.
Exactly. I think it's unpronounceable. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Scott Anthony, and I'm the PI and project lead of Museums and Industry, long histories of collaboration. The sort of genesis of the project briefly is the unavoidable, you can't avoid the amount of controversy that's erupted in the public arena, the media arena, and particularly about the sort of patronage, industrial patronage on museums. There's been lots around, for example, the Sackler family and their relation to the opioid crisis in the United States, and how that's kind of played out in various major cultural heritage sites across Western Europe and North America. Energy companies, particularly fossil fuel companies, have also prompted kind of a range of demonstration and protest, and also to a certain extent a big philanthropy and this kind of idea that this kind of archipelago of NGOs, and this is somehow also kind of connected to kind of reputation laundering and or lobbying. So that's the sort of the immediate sort of public controversy that prompted the genesis of this project. We are actually trying to be more particular and more specific. So specifically, we're looking at the problem of patronage as relates to museums of science, technology, and medicine. And one reason for this is because it struck us that a lot of the sort of language that's used to discuss controversies around patronage is imported from the art world, and we wanted to look specifically at a sector, and we wanted to look at that sector in both historical context and international comparison. And part of the reason for that is it kind of also is inescapable that actually the cultural heritage of science and industry is and has always been completely bound up with economic enterprise and industrial bodies and so on. And so there's kind of an interesting sense whereby you can trace the kind of various reoccurring ethical dilemmas, how they've been resolved and or sort of been reconfigured over time. You can change slides. Yes, thank you. So as I said, I'm the PI. I'm based at the Science Museum Group in the UK, which just just for information, really, incorporates the Science Museum in London, the Railway Museums in York and County Durham, the Science and Industry Museum in Manchester, the Media Museum in Bradford, and the National Collection Centre in Southwest England. We have COIs in France and Spain, and between us there are 4 postdocs, 3 of which are full-time. We also have, as you can see on the bottom part of the slide, 3 major partners: the Norwegian Museum of Science and Industry, the University of London Press, and the think tank Demos. I guess it's probably quite obvious why we'd want the Norwegian Museum of Science and Industry, considering we're interested in international comparison and change over time. University of London Press is an interesting partner for us. They've done a lot of work with very rapid sort of publishing around heritage issues. Did some really interesting work around the Grenfell Tower disaster in England, and done some interesting work with digital formats. So they seemed a good partner for the kind of public impact aspect of what we're trying to do. And again, the think tank Demos there's a lot of kind of archival work and sort of institutional memory recovery that we're doing. And there's also a lot of stakeholders and sort of ethical workshops that we're doing. And I kind of felt it was important to have a partner that would help us ensure that some of our findings were channeled sort of towards maximum policy and political impact, if and where that is appropriate. We can go to next slide, please. In terms of objectives, these are the sort of core questions that come from our proposal. I won't read them out because you can see them on the screen, but essentially we're looking at the operation of patronage, its impact on display, his kind of history of controversies, and the kind of response to controversies. And I think probably the thing that I would like to sort of probably underline, I guess, is that we're sort of interested in a kind of thinking about the norms of ethics in museums and where the values that underpin or what assumptions underpin an assessment of what is or what is not ethical at any given time or any given place. Next slide, please. In terms of methodology, I think the thing I would like to underline is one of the reasons that we pursued this bid, I'm so grateful and so happy to get it, was that we realized actually this work has never really been done before. So there's a sense in which we'll be gathering together what is known about the field, which isn't too much, trying to identify the gaps and looking for resonances. And this will essentially entail a degree of witness seminars and oral histories, also a degree of archival work. And that sort of broad aim is to use that archival work as the basis for a series of stakeholder workshops in different countries and with different groups of people. We can move to the next slide, please. And in terms of expected impacts, as you can see, to enable STM, Science, Technology, Medicine, Heritage organizations to build an empirical understanding of past practices and procedures in different national contexts, and to foster more informed discussions of the ethical conflicts industrial patronage has engendered, or in much more instrumental way, a think tank report, some workshops, an edited volume and articles, and a range of digital resources mainly aimed at professionals. And if we could go to the next slide. I just wanted to say that our opening workshop is on the 20th and 21st of July at the Science Museum in South Kensington in London. And as part of that, we have a public lecture from Dina Kasson of Kasson Man, a kind of incredibly important sort of figure in museum design, exhibition design, worked, for example, on the sort of aborted UNESCO museum that was planned for Turin, and has a great deal of sort of interesting international experience to share, and is part of this kind of witness seminar approach of kind of kicking off the project. And if anyone's interested in that, very happy to host them in London. So that's the project in 7 minutes, which is also 7 minutes. So that's it. Thank you.
Shall we move then to the third presentation of PERCOL, and Glenn Davis will be the host of that. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's great to see everybody this morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about our project. Yes, I'm Glenn Davis. I'm based at the University of St Andrews in Scotland. We have 3 separate research teams that are involved in this particular project, one in the UK, one in Spain, and one in the Netherlands. And we have 3 PIs and 2 postdocs who are working with us. So we're a relatively small team. Our project is focused on queer and trans archives across Europe, and in particular on the historical development of these particular archives and what the history of those archives and their development can tell us, what we can learn from that history about the potential future strategies for sustaining these collections into the future. Public attitudes towards LGBTQ plus people and legislative treatment as well of queer and trans communities differs greatly across Europe, and yet every European nation has its own queer and trans archives, however large or small, however individual, community-based or institutionalized. What we're interested in looking at, and if we could move to the next slide, please, is what can collectively be gained politically and pragmatically from critically scrutinizing the complex and often troubled history of these collections as they have taken shape across the last 5 decades. And I say the last 5 decades, we're kind of starting from the 1970s because that's usually seen as the birth of the contemporary gay rights movement, which is often dated to around 1969 to 1970. We're situating this in a very live political context, a bit like the project that Scott has just been talking about as well. We're very aware of a wider culture and context of homophobic and transphobic acts of violence taking place across Europe, increased amounts of hate speech and acts of discrimination. In some countries, of course, that's being fomented by particular political regimes and political groups. And we're particularly interested in arguing for the social, cultural, and political value of archiving LGBTQ plus lives and experiences, and for the wider ethical significance of supporting and maintaining subaltern collections much more broadly. We're doing this project in collaboration with a team of associate partners. We actually have 17 lined up connected to the project, and these are of varying different sizes and spread across a number of different countries. There are groups of them, obviously, in the UK, Spain, and the Netherlands, who we already had existing relationships with, or who we have forged new relationships with, from Glasgow Women's Library through to the Bishopsgate Institute in London, from the iFilm Museum in the Netherlands to Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid. But we've also made connections with collections in Germany, in Norway, and so on. And we're hoping to connect up with a much broader ecology of these collections as the project evolves over the course of the next 2 years. This is our central research question, which I've just given you a slightly different articulation of. And obviously, this is then broken down into a whole range of different sub-research questions that we're interested in exploring. If we could move to the next slide, please, that would be great. These are our main objectives. Like the other presenters, I'm not going to go through these in detail. You can read them for yourselves. But I think it's worth us saying that we are approaching archives and collections in a very expansive sense. We're interested in looking not only at large institutions, but also in what has sometimes been referred to as counter archives. So collections of materials that sit outside of formal institutional repositories, maybe in personal collections, or that are operating in ways whose methods of working actually sit outside more conventional archival spaces. We want to map these as much as we can do to build a sense of how dispersed the collections are across Europe, and to look at the various different ways in which they operate. But also we want to situate them within individual contexts, the places in which they're located, regional, national, and international contexts. We're going to be working a lot with artists and creative practitioners across the 2 years to look at ways in which artists make contributions to institutional spaces, cultural heritage spaces, but also the ways in which those artists might offer us different ways of thinking about collecting practices, preservation practices for the future. we're also, I think it's worth saying that although this project is focused on queer and trans archives in particular, we're also looking at a much wider intersectional politics of subaltern collections and the ways in which the ramifications of our project will also feed out into a much kind of broader network of organizations. Thank you. If we can move on to the next slide here. As I've already said, we've got these 3 separate teams, and each team is working on its own individual work package over the course of the 2 years. In the UK, we're looking in particular at the geopolitics of individual collections and archives, and the ways in which our collections tend to be grounded in quite local spaces and to speak to individual communities. In Spain, the team there are going to be looking very particularly at archives that sit outside of formal institutions and the politics of those, their funding strategies, the ways in which they operate. And in the Netherlands, the team there are very much going to be exploring the relationships between artistic practitioners and collections. In order to kind of link these projects together, we've actually got themes that all 3 teams are digging into and looking at and sharing across the researchers, looking at issues of institutionalization, of intersectional politics, of transness, both as an identity formation, but also as a kind of a concept, if you like, the notion of ephemerality and issues of erasure. In many places, queer and trans collections are under threat, and we are very aware that that this project is looking for ways to sustain these collections into the future. I'll come to that again in just a second. Our methodology is necessarily multimodal and interdisciplinary. The backgrounds of the main researchers are in the humanities and the social sciences, but we will also be collaborating with specialists in other fields who'll be interjecting their own methods. We've put together in particular a project board who can advise us on alternative approaches that we might want to be adopting, and they're based in the United States, the United Kingdom, and in Germany. We're also keeping ourselves open to potential explorative, tentative methodologies that might give us new ways into addressing the research questions and objectives that we're concerned with. If we could move on, another slide, please. Thank you. We're very keen as a team to make sure that our project is speaking to a diverse array of stakeholders. Not only did we set up this large group of associate partners for us to be working with, but we wanted to make sure that the project speaks to an array of different academic audiences working in a diverse number of different fields. That the ecology of archives and counter archives and collections is as wide as we can potentially connect up with, but also that this is feeding back into communities of LGBTQ+ stakeholders who will be involved in contributing to individual events, workshops, conferences, symposia, and so on that we put on over the course of the next 2 years. We want to make sure, obviously, that all facets of the project bring about transformative changes in knowledge, practice, and policy. We want to make sure as well that our outputs and our events are tailored in order to maximize their impact potential. So, for instance, we'll be thinking quite carefully about the language of delivery and where individual events are taking place. Are they actually speaking to the correct audience, and how can we factor those people into the events that we're organizing? Just a couple of examples. One thing that the team of PIs was very aware of when we were putting the bid together was that there isn't a network in place. There have been previously organizations that have brought together some of these organizations and scholars working on their collections, but they've been lying fallow a little in recent years. So we want to generate a new network of scholars, cultural heritage institutions, and workers and LGBTQ+ community stakeholders. We also see the need to generate a collaboratively authored series of reports and policy proposals for the cultural heritage sector, which we will then use as the basis to look at ways in which these organizations and these collections can be sustained onwards. And I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thanks everyone for your presentations and for thinking with me.
Thanks very much, Inga. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the three speakers. Yeah, unfortunately, we have to, fortunately for them and for us also, but we have to move on in the agenda to the next roundtable. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions. But yeah, priority is then to give the floor to Akon now. We will introduce the next session. Akon, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. It's very good to be here, and I also want to congratulate you with these fine projects that have been granted funding. It's been very interesting to follow the process and to see the results. I think I will organize this roundtable a little bit different. So we will have the three introductions first to the three projects that we are to hear about today. And then we will try to have the discussion afterwards, so we have put more time into that part. So I think we can start with the first project. It's called the ArcHeritage, Commodification, Identity and Revitalisation in the Anthropocene. And I guess that it will be Richard Fraser from the Arctic University of Norway that will give us the introduction to this project. So, Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and hi everyone. So yeah, my name is Richard Fraser. I'm an anthropologist up north at UiT, the Arctic University of Norway. And just in case you're wondering, yes, we do still have snow on the ground. So I'm leading the project ArcHeritage along with Professor David Anderson at the University of Aberdeen and Dr. Martin Lunen at the University of Groningen. Thank you. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. And that's, of course, in addition to several associate partners who I'll discuss a little bit, a PhD student and a couple of postdocs, one of whom I'm glad to say is with us this afternoon. Plus, of course, several representatives from some of the indigenous communities in which we're doing fieldwork. So our project is essentially exploring the commodity chains of three, we can say, iconic heritage artifacts in the Arctic. And those are reindeer antler, the conical tent or the teepee tent, the lavu, as we say up in Sápmi, and walrus ivory. And the aim is to trace the oral histories of these artifacts, but also now their new market and social entanglements connected to the heritage and tourism industries. And we have several field sites, firstly in Sápmi, so the indigenous part of northern Scandinavia, northern Canada and Greenland. Now, of course, these artifacts carry significant value as traditional heritage objects, and thus connect with indigenous skills and long traditions of craft work, and of course also ontologies of human, non-human relations. They have more recently become integrated into the globalized tourism and heritage industries. And therefore they are beginning to merge with processes of commodification, commercialization, and new debates surrounding authenticity, tradition, conservation. So in this context, these three artifacts are taking a new form. So reindeer antler is finding its way into the traditional Chinese medicine market as a form of medicine. The conical tent or the lavu is now being seen as a fixed tourism dwelling or a template for touristic architecture. And you've probably seen with recent ethno-political movements in Sápmi with the Fossen wind farm, also a political symbol. And finally, walrus ivory is being transformed into souvenir carvings, and in the context of Greenland, for example, a symbol of national identity and self-representation. So we feel that the comparison between the commodity chains of these three Arctic heritage objects tells us something quite interesting about Arctic heritage as a whole, and the relationship between indigenous producers of these objects, the consumers who purchase them and move them, and of course the markets which allow them to flow around the world. Could we have the next slide, please? So three short, simple objectives of the project. The first is to research the transformation of these so-called traditional artifacts into heritage objects, the process by which they've moved into the touristic and heritage industries. Second, to trace their movement across national and international commodity chains. All of these objects are literally flowing around the world in various ways, perhaps surprising ways. And thirdly, to assess how they're being deployed within localized debates and narratives such as tradition, commodification, but of course also revitalization. The next slide, please. So methodologically, the project employs historical, ethnographic, and interdisciplinary methods. First, we are seeking to trace the oral histories and traditional uses of these artifacts, connecting to indigenous pastoral and hunting lifeways. This will involve developing quite a comprehensive literature review for each of these objects and to help build a picture of their use, their history, and their transformation. Second, we want to follow the sort of material and the symbolic journeys of these artifacts, beginning from their respective points of origin, so where they're being harvested from nature, where they're being crafted into heritage objects, and then through what we see as emergent networks of commercialization and consumption. So here we adopt, I would say, a material semiotic approach, exploring how the objects are enacted along national and international commodity chains, but also sort of put to work symbolically and economically in new circumstances. An important part of this is, of course, we have to research the decisions and the marketing insights of the producers, which involves close work with heritage transmitters, officially recognized heritage transmitters in various indigenous contexts, but also new actors who are now involved in the tourism industry, for example. And part of this will therefore involve multi-sited fieldwork, mixed methods approaches, but also online interviews, analysis of forums and debates on social media. Now, many of us are anthropologists in the project, so of course we will carry out ethnographic fieldwork, a lot of which builds upon previous fieldwork in various field sites, using participant observation, of course assessing the social, cultural, economic impact of this transformation into commodities, but also the ethnic political dimension. So I mentioned a little bit in the Greenlandic context that walrus ivory is feeding into new narratives of self-determination. The conical tent in Sapmi carries a lot of symbolic value as a political symbol. So there's a lot to be done around that. But of course also to do research on the possible tensions that this fosters, especially given that some of the materials, walrus ivory and reindeer antler, are natural materials and in some contexts are protected, perhaps even in a sense endangered. So we're rubbing up against conservation policy as well. Fourth, we plan to undertake extended interviews with a range of actors, craft producers, heritage transmitters, so-called heritage middlemen. And for this, we're going to be working quite closely with several associate partners at several indigenous museums. And finally, our Netherlands sub-team in Groningen will be doing some really interesting work using ancient DNA, stable isotope, and zoo archaeological analysis of walrus ivory specifically. And that is to trace the much deeper history and medieval trade of walrus ivory, which will of course allow us to connect the historical movement of this objects with contemporary flows that we see today. And also what we're hoping, of course, is that that provides us in the other national teams an opportunity to assess how these methodologies could be applied in our own national context, especially with reindeer antler up here at UIT. The next slide, please. So we see the impact of our project as threefold. Firstly, conceptual, by publishing on and adding to academic debates on cultural heritage, ethnic tourism, Arctic indigenous peoples. We plan an edited volume around this. Secondly, instrumental, through its sharing of ethnographic data with indigenous museums and partners and other heritage stakeholders in the field sites. And finally, capacity building by funding several PhD and postdoc positions. And more specifically, the project is aiming at several sort of targeted impact deliverables. So the first is hosting several community roundtables within the indigenous communities in which we're working. And actually, I was really interested in some of the discussion in the previous panel around this in terms of finding ways to involve, in our case, indigenous partners in a very collaborative sort of conversational style. So that would be really nice to perhaps bring up to ensure, I guess, that our findings have relevance for local concerns. We plan 2 museum exhibitions, one in Norway and one in the Netherlands, on the supply routes of reindeer antler on the one hand and walrus ivory on the other. We have an associate partner at the Museum of Cultural History, that is Groven, Professor Groven, who's been working on vernacular architecture with local Sami institutions for several years. Third, we plan a third exhibition building on a previous project of my own on the Sino-Russia border with a community of reindeer herders there. And we see an opportunity for sharing craft work and digital media around reindeer antler in that context. It's another part of the world where reindeer antler is being commodified for traditional Chinese medicine. We plan several documents, one of which is a policy document on the commodification of indigenous heritage, which we hope will have an impact via cultural affairs ministries in Scandinavia and Northern Canada. Of course, we will host an academic conference up here in Tromsø. And also we are hiring a postgraduate research assistant with proven experience in science journalism, whose role will really be to serve as an impact officer for the duration of the project. So setting up websites and social media accounts, but also acting as a liaison throughout the duration with the communities in which we're working. So I think that's what I've got for now.
We should maybe move on to the next project. It's cultural heritage in the Metropolitan Peripheries, and it is Maria Gravari Barbas that are going to present this project. So Maria, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here with you and to hear about all those so interesting projects. So my name is Maria Gravari Barbas, and I am the scientific coordinator of CUMET and VPI for Paris 1, Panthéon Sorbonne. We are here several colleagues representing the 2 other universities who participate to this program, University Complutense Madrid and University of Antibes. And I put here the logo of Una Europa, which is our European alliance, to which belong the 3 universities, Paris 1, Panthéon Sorbonne, University of Antibes, and Complutense Madrid. We can move to the next slide. So just to present our project briefly, in fact, we started by the conjunction of 2 parallel phenomena, but which sometimes are concurrent phenomena in urban and metropolitan peripheries in most European cities. On the one hand, the fact that there is an increasing recognition of the interest of diverse stakeholders, local decision makers, local communities in cultural heritage, which is located in these urban and metropolitan peripheries. And on the other hand, the fact that in the same urban and metropolitan peripheries, there are needs for new developments, infrastructure, housing, and this in fact results to an unprecedented densification pressures and also extensive renewal of the existing urban fabric. And in fact, the conjunction of these 2 parallel trends creates both opportunities, a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of risks, a lot of new risks for cultural heritage, which is located there. Our our fields are 3 European peripheries. Pleine Commune, which is located in the northern part of Paris, Usera and Villaverde, which is located in Madrid, and Cranton, which is located in Antibes. As I mentioned before, CUMET brings together 3 universities, and we have here the 2 PIs from the other 2 universities, Edward Hollis from the University of Edinburgh and Maria Garcia from the University of Madrid. We have also more colleagues from these 2 universities, and also colleagues from Paris 1, Panthéon Sorbonne, Isidora Stankovic, Linda Bukris, and Maya Gatas. Maya was just hired as a postdoctoral researcher for this project. And I mentioned here also the associated partners, which are extremely important, in fact, for us, located in these three different cities, different peripheries. I will not present them all, but you can see the diversity of these associated partners who will play a major role in this project. And I believe that some representatives from the Pleine Commune, which is in the intercommunality in Paris, are present here. We can pass the next slide. Thank you. So the objectives, in fact, we consider that the urban metropolitan peripheries are usually considered as the city backyards, but they are extremely crucial, extremely important for contemporary metropolization. These urban and metropolitan peripheries are today the theater of diverse social processes, of diverse reconfigurations, which include the formulation of new uses of public space, a new idea also of what public space is or what can be, the creation eventually of new landmarks. And sometimes these new landmarks are created out of for nothing. And also the emergence of new references and new heritage symbols. And we consider also that the urban and metropolitan peripheries are an extraordinary laboratory to understand how heritage can work today in our cities. So they offer the potential for a renewed and more inclusive also understanding of what heritage is. The main questions we're asking is how can we create value on the heritage of the urban peripheries by encouraging new development scenarios, while of course protecting also this very vulnerable heritage located, vulnerable because modest, because sometimes anonymous, because not recognized. So while protecting this cultural heritage, also what are the necessary mechanisms and the necessary tools to truly involve local communities in the policy making of cultural heritage in the urban and metropolitan peripheries? And of course, how this heritage can be used as a means to promote spatial justice. And when we speak about spatial justice, we speak also about social justice, of course. How can we use this heritage of the urban and metropolitan peripheries in order to balance the differences between the different areas of metropolises, between the usually over-visited and over-recognized sometimes historical, which is the case in our three cities, historical heritage located in the center, and the heritage of the urban peripheries. And finally, but this is, I think, a very important question for us, is how can heritage in the peripheries play a role as a cement of metropolization? Because this metropolis building, metropolis construction, we know how difficult it is in most of our European cities. The next slide. So in terms of methodology, of course, we are totally interdisciplinary. Most of the researchers who participate in this project are from the geography field, from architecture, from economy, from law, from history of art, and for informatics, computer sciences. So this is a totally interdisciplinary project, and we will use interdisciplinary approaches. We will start with an analysis of secondary sources, which, of course, will be extremely diverse in this kind of context. We will do a very extensive field work, interviews, surveys, and of course, a lot of direct observation. We have already identified a series of stakeholders which are supposed to represent as globally as possible, in fact, the realities in these urban metropolitan peripheries in our three metropolises. We are also working on the creation of an observatory of the heritagization dynamics in our three urban peripheries, which in fact is supposed really to follow the heritagization dynamics. So the debates, the policies, the conflicts, of course, because this is also a very conflictual process, and the implication of the civil society. One of the main methodological tools is the organization of 9 co-creation workshops 3 in each of our metropolises, with elected authorities, with local decision makers, with NGOs, with the civil society, of course, in order to also understand what is heritage in the urban peripheries from below, if I can say so. So see how this heritage is defined by those who live and work there. We will produce educational material on heritage of the urban peripheries, but this is also both an output and also a methodological tool for us. And we will finish with a workshop which will be organized with the stakeholders this time of the 3 metropolises, while the nine workshops I mentioned before will be organized in the 3 different cities. Of course, in this kind of research, linguistic issues are extremely important. So sometimes it is complicated to bring all the stakeholders systematically together. I would like already to invite you, because we are starting with a conference. So our first conference will take place on June 5 and 6. And you are all of you very, very welcome. I can send you the invitation just after this presentation. And the next slide. So in terms of impacts, we hope at least to have a very direct local impact, mainly through the 9 co-creation workshops, which will be organized in some very key locations in these 9 metropolises, sometimes to locations which correspond to heritage that will probably disappear in the months and years to come, so very vulnerable also places. The idea is, of course, to propose this material concretely to to the civil society, to the local stakeholders. So we believe that the empirical and these persuasive materials, which will be produced mainly through the 9 workshops, and which will be designed with community participation, they will in fact have an impact locally, and will interfere in a way, positively interfere with both the heritization and the metropolization process. And we also hope that our online observatory, the online observatory platform, which will be created during this project, and which is supposed to live, because we will take all the necessary measures in order to make it sustainable through future also initiatives. We hope that this observatory can act as an open resource for stakeholders in the different peripheral sites, not only in our 3 metropolises, but also in other metropolises all around Europe, which face more or less the same kind of challenges. Yeah. So I think this is more or less what I would like to present today. And thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much. I think we will also have an introduction to the 3rd project. It's heritage in depopulated European areas, and it is Ivan Murin that are going to present this project. So Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, nice to present our project past our colleagues, because especially past Maria presentation, I think that our project is very complementary with our discussion in the our project is named Heritage in Depopulated European Areas. Thank you for this first slide. The first idea in the composing of the project partners was be representative from different European areas, which depopulation phenomenon that we can recognize not only in the past decades of the history, but in the long-term periods. Our partners are from West, Central, and East European. That and from Kaunas University of Technology. There are all colleagues from Faculty of Civil Engineering and Architecture from Kaunas. From Central European, my university, Charles University in Prague. I am originally anthropologist that was interesting in research of process of transmission of culture in local communities, and colleagues from Institute for Northern Studies from Shetland Islands, United Kingdom. That we are really from three different regions, European, from three different disciplinary, the architects, anthropologists, demographer, and ethnologists, folkloristics. The fourth partner is University from Slovakia, University from Trnava. We would like join with us the one university from a country that is not a regular partner in JPI, and in this call was not this country active, but we can be in contact with different colleagues, which mainly with very specific empirical knowledge in the process of the depopulation. As we can see, we have up to 10 associate partners because in our research we have of course a depopulated area with not many stakeholders as assumed of the person, that this associated partner are not too big, but maybe in representative. For example, region of Hradec Králové, that is one of region in Central European, which is really characteristic for depopulation past Second World War. And we have another not formal partners, but informal groups, for example, AGO, for example, partners from traditional culture associates, and maybe for us was criterion be in dissemination active in different levels of impact of our findings. Please, we can move to the next slide. What about objectives? We have same as differences between methodology maybe, and between some cross science importance. We have three tangible, intangible, and heritage-based process objectives. The first intangible is what is the impact of demographic process on the cultural identity and urban science. There we have some question. For example, how does the change in the local population affect to the conservation of heritage sites? How cultural heritage is and could be activated in a bottom-up while under changing demographic situation. Another part of this objective is a question: what are the physical changes to the protected state properties, and how do they affect objects? The next in this question we have another subtopic and questions. For example, does function transformation affect the present preservation of the authenticity of heritage sites? Do psychical changes the heritage site after the cultural value? How does the transformation of urban neighborhoods affect the local community, etc.? The second, intangible cultural heritage and depopulation. we would like to be interested how effective have the depopulated local community been in protecting and dissemination cultural heritage. In this question, we have some ideas or paradigm, if we can, that when transmitters of heritage contents are minimalized in the number, we have the specific processes which we must protect, and we must be very sensitive in recognizing what are the native voices from these localities. Second one question can be which part in studied regions have been particularly successful in mobilizing cultural heritage to address demographic change. The paradigm of vitality of culture is a paradigm that we recognize very idealistic, but we don't know what is the connectivity between government and the local communities. And third question is leads to the heritageization processes in demographic changes. Together with demographers, we would recognize what are the consequences of depopulation for demographic and social stability, usually in local communities. Second, what are the consequences of depopulation for culture transmission, and especially this leads to the scientific research agenda of JPI, because the old generation and the young generation, that is very important in research. What communication canals, processes still exist, and in the level on virtual and for us more important contact communication. And last, maybe in this section, what is the relationship in depopulation and cultural heritage in three models cross-cultural regions? Because we would like to pick up three case studies from three countries and three parts of Europe, if we can, when we can demonstrate the processes, and then we can generalize it or common knowledge. Please move to the next slide. Something about research methodology. The first research we can at the moment is the basic demographic research of or behavior in local communities. Maybe we have the different historical background of demography, and we would like to put some sum of common knowledge about demographic facts and demographic contents. For example, the next methodology we use we would like use methodology of architecture, anthropologies, of course, as an observation, as a field work, as I stay in field work now, and of course transcription of heritage contents and changes between transmission of in different heritage science. The second part methodology leads more to the applied methodology, where we can collect in different levels good practice, of course, and practice may be bad and that is not very practiced, not very known. But from these we can prepare something as guidelines for local communities with depopulation phenomena. What methodological innovation we can prepare? Mainly, we would like to realize cross-culture comparison of data. For this, we have the same and qualitative or quantitative data, and we would like to prepare some hermeneutic unit as a method where we can collect the data with different scientific analyses and local voices, because the scientific epistemology and the native epistemology, that is our common sense that we must recognize. And of course, case study design, we would like to realize in detail case studies from 3 localities or three phenomena, and we will demonstrate our findings on this case. Please, next slide.
Ivan, I'm sorry to ask you, but could you be a little bit quicker on the last few slides if you want to have some time?
Right, that is absolutely all right. That is absolutely last. It is very quantitative. You can see there what impacts in table we accept. Maybe one correction. We would like realize more than 6 analytical studies with cases. Please, next. Thank you very much, colleagues.
I'll turn to Charles, who will conclude this meeting in 3 minutes. So you have plenty of time.
I've got 3 minutes to conclude. Thank you very much. Well, I think it was a very interesting kickoff. It's an occasion for members of the different projects, of the 6 projects, to discover what each others do and are working on. I think we've seen the diversity of the projects, the thematical and geographical diversity. There were interesting reflections and discussions around methodology, which is absolutely crucial for good research, for excellent research. I was pleased to see the emphasis put on methodology or methodologies. I was also interested in the will to talk to and to include stakeholders, i.e. that people outside academia, may they be institutions or diverse communities. We've had several of those throughout the projects, and I think that's, again, very important. Also, we saw that there are new objects of heritage. There's certainly transformation by tourists, maybe sometimes confusion between cultural and commercial, but anyhow, transformation is there. We saw the changes by globalization and by urbanization as well. I was wondering if our understanding of heritage, listening to all of you, was in some ways sometimes not slightly Eurocentric or Western-centric anyhow, and I was wondering how our understanding of heritage would be addressed by non-European and non-Western countries. And I think there may be a little risk of the extension of the notion of heritage, which is understandably wide, won't turn heritage into a blanket notion, which obviously is convenient, which allows the recognition of smaller communities or specific communities. But I do think there should be thoughts and reflections on that. Anyhow, having said that, I would like to thank all those who've organised and participated in this kickoff. I'd like to thank Inga and Hakon for having extremely well shared the 2 round tables, and thank you very much for that. I'd like to thank Mariki and Chang-Yoon for their input, which is extremely precious because it's going to be needed throughout the 3 years or 4 years of the project. And obviously, we shall be hearing more from them at each of our meetings. And my final thanks obviously go to Benjamin for having organised the kickoff and having followed it and made sure that everything works perfectly well, which is quite remarkable. So thank you all for your help. And I think we now, well, I'll pass you back to Benjamin because he'll tell us what we're supposed to be doing now.
Thank you very much, Charles. And yes, thanks to all of you. And again, perhaps I'm not even sure I said it, but congratulations again to all project participants for this great success. And we look forward to seeing your projects going live in the next few years. So thanks for participating. Bye-bye.